Good evening. This is Defacto Review, a weekly analysis of Mongolia's latest political, economic, and social issues by economist and columnist Mr. Charles Sahin.
Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Where are you joining us from today?
Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur.
That's great. So this week we're going to be discussing the traffic gridlock issue here in Ulaanbaatar city, and whether the state is hindering the development of the country, and how climate change is affecting Mongolia. So last Friday we saw a gridlock through the entire city of Ulaanbaatar. We saw snowfall begin around noon, and as we get precipitation in Ulaanbaatar, traffic tends to slow down by a lot. So this is exactly what happened last Friday when there was a gridlock, or what we call zero stop, beginning around 1800 hours. And when it snows, snow and ice reduce pavement friction and vehicle maneuverability, causing slower speeds, reduced roadway capacity, and increased crash risk. So average road speeds decline by 30 to 40% on snowy or slushy pavement. And this causes a lot of problems for the cars in Ulaanbaatar city, of which there are a lot. As of last year, there were 662,000 registered vehicles in the capital city. And there were accounts of people last Friday spending 4.5 hours in traffic to travel from the old airport to the Yarmuk Bridge, which is about 8 kilometers. So that means they spent it took them more than 1 hour to go 2 kilometers per hour. And there were people that did not move at all for 95 minutes. So this is a major issue here in Ulaanbaatar. And we seem to see this every year, and it's becoming more and more common, especially during the winter. So how do we begin to tackle this issue?
8 kilometers, 4 hours. There are many factors impacting on the situation. First of all, it's a matter of city planning and road planning. Mm-hmm. Inside of this issue, the main problem is governance. Many things were secret. The previous leaders, managers of Ulaanbaatar city were sailing our lands under the table, about which I was talking for many years. And I was comparing Ulaanbaatar people with fish. You catch it, cut it, fry it, eat it, no single sound. That's like Ulaanbaatar citizens. Second factor is about the standard of road construction. Mm-hmm. We have some, but the problem is with monitoring that standard, whether it is done or not. The third is maintenance, cost, and rules. There is some, but the Ulaanbaatar city has always had a road, on the road, ice and snow. Mm. And the one for last Friday is just, we say a lot about that just because we have now application called about Ulaanbaatar traffic. And that application completely was on, a red light was on every single road in Ulaanbaatar city. Mm-hmm. The issue, the knowledge is new, but the issue is old. And it's a matter of also too much concentration of maintenance of the road. It should be by each district, and every district should start cleaning the road with the beginning of snow or ice, which is not the case. Financial issue, organizational issue. The most important thing is the money for road maintenance. And we are not clear. People don't know well what is happening with the road fund. We know only one thing. For example, for this year, by October 1st, the road collected some around 1 billion MNT. 40% goes for organizational cost, 60% goes, they said, for maintenance. So we would like to know the details so that everybody knows what's happening in your district. You know, the Democracy and Freedom Act give you a chance to control, to make sure that your living standard is good, maintained, which we are not using that the chance. That's how I see.
So you touched on the issue of governance, and one, I guess I would say, scandal that happened during this gridlock last week was there was a car leaving the government offices, and they stopped the oncoming traffic, and one car, so someone from the government was going across on the opposite side of the road. They stopped traffic to go during this gridlock. So people were very outraged about this. So what do you think about this specific issue?
Well, that's one of the clear example how the rules don't work equally for everybody. Mm-hmm. It should start from the top leadership. And yet they stop whole traffic and go on the opposite side of the road, completely stopping two sides of the road. So people, of course, are outraged, and rightly so. So on one side. On the other side, we need to see bigger picture. Why is it in general happening? I've just now talked about some factors, but it is too much concentration in Ulaanbaatar city. Not because, the people especially want to live in Ulaanbaatar city. Because on this vast land, Ulaanbaatar is market. 1.5 million only people market. And as you said, we have over 600,000 cars in Ulaanbaatar city. Almost every 2.5 person has one car. So somebody is to take a very strong measure on that. Once the cup is full, there's two ways. You stop input or increase your cup. There is no other way. Increasing the cup is very hard because this land, all this planning, all this, we have very bad one. In order to decrease the input, there are several ways, which we are taking the first step already. We are limiting the cars by the plate numbers. On a certain day, you don't go on the certain road. Soon, and it looks like almost from next month, they will increase that divide. It will be even and uneven plate numbers. The third, they will decrease or increase the price for driving through the particular zone, say in the very center.
So would that be through tolls?
They will increase the price. Now they are working on that, by the way, that every car can be read by certain radar, and then you will be paid more money if you go through the main traffic major streets. The fourth will be, I don't think the politicians are ready to do so, but like in some countries, the plates numbers will be more expensive than the car itself, like in Singapore. Because there should be a certain limit, for certain per square meter, there should be certain car. There is certain distance, spaces. So that's what is going to happen, I guess, in Ulaanbaatar. So otherwise, as the Sukhbaatar newly appointed Minister for Traffic Control, or Traffic Jam, I would say, suggesting that we should more increase incentives for people to live not in Ulaanbaatar city, in a remote area. They have a lot tax exemptions, payment for mortgages, etc., and increase of salary for public officers. I think those are the right measures to do so, but it is not guaranteed if there is no good education, healthcare systems in the remote area, which is expensive and hard to do so. At the end, we have a land 5 times more than France, so we should have that into an account.
So you've mentioned ways to limit the number of cars in the streets, but there is still demand for citizens to drive their cars. So what alternatives would we offer? So there is public transport in Ulaanbaatar, but I think it greatly needs to be expanded. Is there any other ways to tackle this issue of alternative methods to cars?
We have been talking about better public transport for many years, but it is not done substantially new things here. The Ulaanbaatar city promised that they will buy some 1,000 new buses this year. Well, hopefully next year now. But however, until people really make strong pressure on them to do so, things will not be changing. And that trigger of pressure of the people will be that more expensive cost driving through the city, more import tax on the cars, in particular big ones, and on limit of Japanese wheel car, which is not in line with our traffic movement, which is a right-hand rule in Mongolia. Japanese car is left-hand rule. So all these three measures to be made. But I doubt that these current politicians will do it now because we have only 18 months to the next election. So we do expect the same zero stop many times this year, this winter, and next winter as well. Because I don't think they will do one of them, as I suggested, concerning tax, limiting the import, etc.
Let's move on to our second issue for this week. This week, Prime Minister Ulaanbaatar met with over 1,200 government employees from all sectors. And during this talk, he introduced the New Revival policy to these attendees and took on and mentioned issues of corruption, tackling bureaucratic problems in Mongolia, and training capable and responsible civil servants for Mongolia. And he highlighted that Mongolia stands at 110th out of 180 countries on the corruption index, and mentioned that the state is in the way of Mongolia's development. So, what exactly do you think that the Prime Minister meant by this?
It's a good that he met 1,200 public officers of different ranks, of different offices, and explained them why the state became the restricting factors of our development. Under new recovery, or sometimes called a new revival policy, there are 6 restricting factors of our development. And in one of them is the governance. And inside of the governance, the corruption issue. This staggering place, 110th out of 180 countries, corruption. Indeed, this is the real indicator of our level of and quality of our governance. So there are a lot of things indeed to do. So he said that we should more coordinate our operations and get united and be leadership. I think it is not enough. I think the most important thing to combat corruption is to penalize those who corrupt. There are already many, I would say 3 major cases he had himself disclosed to the public. First, development bank corruption. Second, this stealing of coal in millions of tons from the largest coal mining company, state-owned. The third case is racketeering. Suruga Corporation, Japanese company's boss, by many highly positioned public officers. Names are there, but things go very slow. What is the heck is this if we just know there are corruptions, there are stealings, public property, and no punishment? It means our judicial system works so slow. And I don't believe that now for 18 months before the next election, the politicians will do some bold steps. Because there are two political parties, Democratic and People's Party, both representatives, high-ranking representatives, are involved in these three cases. And they're mutually keeping each other to move. If it doesn't move, if it doesn't solve these three issues at least, then people will less believe in these two political parties, in particular ruling parties, which promises to have not very clear victory for the next election, which will again extend the miserability of people suffering from corruption in the country. The other thing, Prime Minister said that thanks to the e-Mongolia application, 67 organizations, state organizations, and 742 services are embedded into the application, which is on the phone of everybody. Another issue, if everybody can use that or not. So there is a still digital divide we need to pay attention. So Mongolia is slowly moving ahead to decrease that our position in the corruption indexes. But unless they solve at least these three scandalous issues, I don't think we will improve our positions.
So in order to move up in the corruption index, to move to a more positive spot, you've said that we need to be punishing, or I guess we should be discouraging this type of corruption by penalizing them. So would that require major amounts, or I guess would that require major change in our judicial system?
Judicial system, yeah, certainly to be improved. There are several high-ranking judges we are looking for through Interpol in the world. And still there are many cases related to bad judges in the country. So we are waiting patiently those issues to be solved. The other thing also to increase our position into better direction is state-owned enterprises. And there are more and more state-owned enterprises in Mongolia, which means there are poor governance because it's represented by the political nominees, officers, who are somehow public officers are running in a way businesses. It doesn't work in that way. And plus, the state-owned enterprises behave like some care foundations. During COVID-19, all energy bills were paid by Irtinet copper concentrate company. So question is, I'm not against the people taking care of their payment, but I'm against the misleading the principles of the company. Company are not there to pay somebody's cost, to bear some social care costs. Or you call it as a foundation, care foundation, or it's corporation. And the very fact that the government is allowing to do so means that they are not competitive. They are anyway not competitive, all the state-owned enterprises. As we see their foreign debts, the majority of our foreign debts owned by them, guaranteed by the state. And of course, the governance is consisting of, the board is consisting of mostly politicians. Instead, all those companies to be public company, truly public company, where the representatives of shareholders are on the board. For example, state-owned enterprises are really making more donations somehow to their political parties. And political party financing are still not clear in Mongolia. The rulers are promising every year to make an amendment to this law. as much as I know, for the last 20 years, they're going to change that law, which is they are not doing. Mm-hmm. Because if they do, then they will not have the money to buy votes at the next election. It will be too much transparent. You know, in a mature democracy, every political party announces which person, which company is contributing to their fundraising, mm-hmm. which makes clear that that company, a particular company, supports which political party. That's what is missing in Mongolia, along with the transparency of those funds, expenses, the way they spend this fund.
Let's move on to our final issue for this week. The Earth has gotten, in terms of global warming, the Earth has gotten 1.2 degrees warmer since 1880, which is the highest rate seen since the Ice Age. So we've seen consequences of this global warming through events such as the flooding in Pakistan, which claimed the lives of 1,700 people and caused $40 billion in damages. And earlier this month, over 30,000 delegates and officials gathered for the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference in Egypt, and a lot of representatives from Mongolia showed up there as well. And as for Mongolia, we've received, just over the past 6 years, we've received $75 million from the Green Climate Fund to battle climate change. And as an outcome of the conference that happened earlier this month, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, member states reached a breakthrough agreement to create a new loss and damage fund for vulnerable countries. And so far, developed countries have agreed to raise around $300 million. And as for the funding that we've received from the Green Climate Fund, which was $75 million over the past 6 years, how has this investment been used in Mongolia? Has it been used appropriately, would you say?
Well, indeed, this amount of money, some 70 or 80,000 million per year to fight global warming in Mongolia, is very important. And global warming is damaging many countries, in some countries in particular stronger, including Mongolia. Our increase of temperature is around 2%, more than higher than the average in the world. As a result, we have deforestation, desertification of our pasture land, substantial one, which affects the amount of herds we have, and in particular, very stronger movement or moving of nomads following better pasture land across the onson or Aimak, in cases all zones, from Western Aimak, they would go to the most eastern Aimak, which creates new problem which we are not familiar with before. So it is a new public relations, new social relations, new reality, and we really need to pay more attention to the desertification of our pasture land, which is the base of our agriculture industry, mostly consisting of animal husbandry. However, we don't know how much money is spent for that, in which way, in which Aimak, by whom. That's why we need to know the report of the old funds from the related public officials. And we get this kind of figures only at the international forums. So we should know more in details so that we use more efficiently the money that the developed countries are dispersing through different funds, including the Green Fund. Turn out in the Green Fund, we also receive this certain amount of money every year, and we pay only $90,000 as a fee to these places, like many other developing countries. And also because we have promised that by 2030, we will decrease CO2 amounts carbon dioxide amount by 14%. And the way of decreasing is our present plan to planting 1 billion trees. That initiative going on all around the country. One issue is planting. The other issue is growing, and what would be the result? So we want to see that whole complex, whole circle of the issue.
So you mentioned that Mongolia has pledged to decrease our CO2 emissions by 2030, and with the building of the two major hydropower plants in the northern and western regions, do you think that this goal is realistic for 2030?
Well, this is one of the way of deducting that CO2 emissions, because hydropower stations, we are allowed to do so, because in one of them, and many Russians say that it will impact on the Baikal Lake situation, which many funds now, including Russian scientists, fund it's groundless. So if we make at the end the hydropower stations, we will be more able to regulate our power production and consumption. So hopefully it will help us to decrease the amount of coal we use, because domestically we almost 100% on coal power stations. So with the hydropower stations, situation will be less difficult than now.
This has been it for this week's Defacto Review. Defacto Review is a weekly analysis of Mongolia's latest political, economic, and social issues by economist and columnist Mr. Jaral Sahai.
Thank you very much for watching us weekly. And you can also rewatch it on our website, jargaldefacto.com. And this program is also now in Mongolian, so that we all together united to fight corruption in Mongolia.